Russians and Americans were on moon together. Yes, it sounds really crazy, but as it turns out, it was true. We all know how the space race evolved over time with bigger goals to achieve every time. As irony puts it, Soviets had beaten Americans to every major space challenge except getting the first moon sample and landing a man on the moon. They put first satellite, first living being in orbiting the planet, first man, first woman, first spacewalk, first multiple crews, first rendezvous, first to exit the Earth's orbit and first to orbit the moon, first to orbit Venus and first to enter another planet atmosphere and retrieve data. And the list goes on. Americans were getting defeated to every major space goal, which was unacceptable for the morale of the country, which boasted of its technological superiority. So the most intelligent Americans sat in a room to devise a strategy to beat USSR, who were neck in neck with Americans in all the space technologies. And they decided to challenge USSR where they would have to start from scratch, and thus it was decided to land a man on the moon, which will require giant rockets, bigger engines, intelligent navigation, superior computers with better memory. This brought the nations back to the starting line of the race. Whether USSR was interested in the challenge is a different mystery altogether. But what's truth is that they did try to get the moon samples before American astronauts could reach there and retrieve them back to the Earth. So this is what happened. On 13th July 1969, Luna 15, which was capable of retrieving the moon samples back to the Earth, was launched on a Proton KD rocket from USSR, which was 3 days before Apollo 11, which was launched on July 16, 1969. Luna 15 entered the moon orbit on 17th July, which was also 3 days before Apollo did. The launch puzzled NASA and surprised the Apollo 11 crew, who only knew about its existence en route to the moon. No one exactly knew where it was going or how it could interfere with the three Americans heading for the same place. The moon's surface is about the size of Africa, but orbital dynamics suggested landing spots around the moon's equator were best, potentially limiting the distance between Apollo 11 and Luna 15. There was only one unlikely solution to all of this: get the flight details from the Soviets themselves during the Cold War, in the midst of moon race. And yet, Apollo 8 astronaut Frank Borman had met Soviet space official. Russians telegraphed the orbital details for Luna 15 and said it would be a safe transit for the US astronauts, though he never divulged the mission details. Meanwhile, as Apollo 11 rocketed towards the moon, Houston Ground Control kept the crew informed about the whereabouts of Luna 15. It had entered orbit on July 17th, Houston told the crew, according to the flight logs. Both the spacecraft made orbital adjustments as the ground control in both the nations nervously watched. Thus, as per the track record, it would seem that the Americans were in for a surprise now, because at any moment of the time while the Apollo was en route to the moon, Luna 15 would descend, make a soft landing, retrieve moon sample and blast off to Earth. It seemed too obvious, but there is where the problem occurred. Soviet engineers worried over the rugged terrain of Sea of Crisis landing site and delayed its planned landing for hours. That opened the window for Apollo 11 to land. As Armstrong and Aldrin took photos, collected samples, and marveled at the view of Earth, Luna 15 tumbled in the orbit. The Soviets realized they were running out of time, and a day later, on July 21, they decided to make an effort to land, which surprised the British astronomers listening to Soviet transmissions. They were unaware it was designed to do so. Luna 15 descended, cushioned by retro rockets. But its trajectory was off, sending the spacecraft careening into a mountain at 298 miles an hour and finally plummeting into the moonscape. It crashed about 350 miles from the US landing site, a full 2 hours and 4 minutes before the Eagle began its flight back to Columbia module of Apollo. Well, in a race to reach the moon and return to Earth, the parallel missions of Luna 15 and Apollo 11 represented in many ways the culmination of space race between the space programs of both the countries. The simultaneous missions became one of the first instances of Soviet-American space cooperation. The Soviet Union released Luna 15's flight plan to ensure it would not collide with Apollo 11.